What is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba Pearson, Melba for Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the Resident Legal Diva. And it's time for another Mondays with Melba. As with anything, sometimes tech works with you and sometimes it doesn't. So it is what it is. We'll make it do what it do. So today is a celebration of Juneteenth. And in order to give you the background, the history, and the way that it applies to today and why we should be thinking about that history today, I'm bringing on my favorite historian, Senator Dwight Bullard, who is an amazing friend, an amazing activist, has been laying his body and his mind on the line for our freedom, for our civil rights. He got arrested up in Tallahassee trying to talk to the governor about these policies that are negatively impacting so many communities of color. So he is just the most amazing and appropriate person to bring to talk about this. Not only to mention, he was also an elementary school teacher, right? Elementary school?
High school.
Yeah, high school teacher. So
yeah, me and the babies only got along.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dwight. Please introduce yourself to the people, what you're working on, and then we can talk about Juneteenth.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Melba, for inviting me on Mondays with Melba. Definitely, since the good old days of the Cosby Show and Martin on Thursdays, Mondays with Melba has become an essential component in my weekly viewing schedule.
Oh my God, that's love! Oh my God.
Everybody else, but as Melba pointed out, I'm former State Senator Dwight Bullard. I have the honor and pleasure of now serving as the senior political advisor for Florida Rising, which is the state's largest independent political organization. And as you alluded to, I had the honor and the privilege of being a 17-year educator in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, teaching social studies, predominantly African-American and American history. And so happy to be on this show to talk about, I think, one of our mutually newest favorite national holidays, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But Juneteenth, and I don't know if you just want to delve into kind of like the backstory.
Yes.
Well, awesome. As people are coming to know, Juneteenth has, at least as of 2022, become a recognized national holiday thanks to an act of Congress. Juneteenth recognizes when the last group of enslaved Africans were read the Emancipation Proclamation on June 19th, 1865. For those of you who know a little bit about history, the Civil War, which ran from 1861 to 1865, concluded in April of 1865. So if for those who understand that the math ain't really mathing, they're absolutely right. In June of 1865, some 2 months after the end of the Civil War, you finally had the last group of enslaved Africans recognizing kind of their symbolic freedom, if you will, with the Union soldiers being able to read to those folks in the Port Arthur, Galveston area that they had been granted their freedom through the Emancipation Proclamation. And so Juneteenth recognizes that as a celebratory time. The folks in Texas have been celebrating Juneteenth for decades now. And it's been a growing celebration nationally, but it did take officially an act of Congress very recently to kind of recognize it. Now, one of the things that is always kind of glanced over is not only are we talking about an occurrence that happens 2 months after the Civil War ends, but we also have to recognize that this process, and just a couple more history factoids, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in January of 1863. President Abraham Lincoln issued that proclamation really as a part of the ongoing conflict between the Union and the Confederacy to really kind of weaken the Confederacy by basically saying that enslaved persons in territories that had taken up arms against the Union would be allowed to be free. At that time, though, the Union had suffered a number of losses, and folks didn't know when the war or how much longer the war would continue for that reason. And so what he basically told his commanders to do in Union forces was to go around the South making this declaration to impacted groups of enslaved Africans throughout the South. I bring this up because that means that many states, many Southern states, have their own Emancipation Day, meaning a day in which they were read the Emancipation Proclamation. In the case of Florida, Florida's Emancipation Day is May 20th, 1865, almost a month to the day before the last group in Texas were read the Emancipation Proclamation. And so a number of states, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, all have their varying Emancipation Days. And many of those states are beginning to recognize their own Emancipation Day through declaration or proclamation so that people understand about the important history of this country that too often left out Black individuals.
So what are some ways that Juneteenth is celebrated? Like how is it commemorated when, you go around the country? Is it different in Texas as it is in Florida? Or are there some key components, kind of like Kwanzaa, that everybody has the set of candles and the certain colors? So how does that look?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. Unlike Kwanzaa, which again, as we open Pandora's box, everyone thinks Kwanzaa is a Christmas replacement holiday for Black people when it is not. It is in fact a celebration that begins the day after Christmas and goes into a New Year's Day. But we'll save that for another Mondays with Melba.
Exactly.
Have a different discussion about Kwanzaa. But the celebration of Juneteenth for the folks in Texas, one of the other terms that they use for it is Jubilee Day. And so, over the decades that has been celebrated, you have everything from carnivals to gospel celebrations to family get-togethers and barbecues that kind of become kind of part of this culture of celebrating this day of emancipation. Again, if you go to Houston, Galveston to this day, you have these large, that are going on for multiple year celebrations that are supported by the Black communities in those spaces. For states that are just now kind of recognizing and celebrating it, you're seeing the manifestation of a number of different things. I think this year in particular, you're starting to see more and more cities, towns, municipalities celebrate it in their own way. I know, the city of Miami Gardens, which is one of the largest Black cities or predominantly Black cities in the country and in the South, especially, is doing a concert. Or, you have a lecture series happening with different organizations. You have, again, small to large scale celebrations kind of going on throughout the country. But that also creates a situation, and we want to make sure we clear the air that this is a full-on celebration of Black liberation. Mm-hmm. Full stop, right? I think a lot of people kind of get lost in the sauce that everything that is a party needs to be a party or done in a particular way, and we need napkins and plates and all the above and all of that. I'm not going to knock, kind of the monetizing, if you will, of this celebration. I think representation matters. So when the Targets and the Walmarts and the Publix of the world decide to put out Juneteenth plates or Juneteenth cupcakes to help folks celebrate, for those who need that, that is helpful. But I think where it gets a little dangerous and we get a little too close to crossing the line is when people try to conflate this celebration of Black liberation with just a general celebration. People try to equate it to 4th of July or kind of other kind of celebratory holidays. But we also have to remember that this is Black liberation, which meant the day before that you had people who were experiencing one of the most cruel indignations in the history of mankind, which was the enslavement of human beings, and then treating those human beings as capital, right? That had plagued this country for hundreds of years. And so when we think about how exciting the liberation of those people are, it can't come at the price of forgetting what they're being liberated from, right? And so we need people to understand that and not kind of just treat this as though let's turn up the music, let's have a good time to celebrate this great day. You also have to pay homage to the multitude of people who suffered under the institution of slavery in this country.
And it almost makes me think about sort of Memorial Day, right? Because, you think everybody has a barbecue on Memorial Day, long weekend. For those of us who are originally from up north, that's the beginning of the beach season. So you're headed to the Hamptons, you're headed to Martha's Vineyard, whatever the case may be, or you're headed to Jones Beach, whatever, right? But folks don't always think about the fact that Memorial Day is also the day to honor the people who lost their lives fighting for freedom, right? So oftentimes it's very little more than a moment of silence or anything like that, and people are more focused on the fun. So again, Juneteenth, it's very important to focus on the history and just, yes, we're celebrating the fact that folks were emancipated, but they shouldn't have had to be emancipated to begin with, right? Because they should never have been enslaved, right?
Absolutely. So, and I'm happy that you brought Memorial Day, because I think it's an opportunity to highlight the kind of interesting backstory and Black story that is Memorial Day, right? And so just, really quickly, it begins as what is called Decoration Day in Charleston, South Carolina, where again, newly freed, newly emancipated Black people chose to honor fallen Union soldiers who were buried, many in a mass grave at what was a Confederate prison camp, and just really wanting to honor those individuals who sacrificed their literal lives in the fight for freedom. And so when we think about Memorial Day in terms of honoring veterans, honoring fallen soldiers, it's oftentimes the forgotten history of the country, where we recognize that it was Black people who stood in the gap to make that recognition, because people oftentimes think, oh, we've always loved our troops or we've always loved our soldiers. The war between the states, the Civil War, as we know it, was one that people tried to quickly change the dimensions of what that struggle was about. And you hear it even today, where people try to diminish this notion of trying to save the country from itself. The fact that individuals who shared borders had to fight each other around this question of, would we continue slavery moving forward? I don't want people, again, to forget the why sometimes, right? I think too oftentimes we have people that are in a rush to say, forget that, don't worry about that, get over it. You hear this all the time. And so again, centering Juneteenth, we want to use this as a moment to remind folks that people sacrificed their freedom, their literal freedom, for hundreds of years prior to this emancipation or Jubilee celebration. And so, lest we not forget the origins of where this begins, because what I want people to be able to do is look back on this Mondays with Melba conversation when we're long gone,
Yeah.
and always use it as a point of reference that Juneteenth isn't just about this monetizing thing, because of course, like MLK Day or any other holiday, people are going to sit there and have brunches and go to places and have a good time, which is your right. However, we cannot forget from whence we came.
Absolutely. And just piggybacking on that, why is it so important to really center the history of Juneteenth, especially right now? Because there's just a few things happening, and I feel like we're getting a little distracted. So,
yeah. So it's important. Really, we talk about. So I have a number of tattoos. It's my story. I'm addicted. But one of those tattoos is, of course, the Adinkra symbol of Sankofa, which is, basically translates to go and fetch it, or know your history, or if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And so we find ourselves in this moment where people are actively trying to erode the more difficult stories in our history, and understand that history is not always about celebratory times and good times and, champagne bottles and celebrations. It is oftentimes wrought with some of the most difficult, demoralizing, and frankly, deplorable parts that we can think about. Slavery being, easily in the top three
right, yeah,
things that have ever happened in American history that impact folks. And so I want folks to kind of understand that as you're seeing book bans, as you're seeing attacks on history, and mind you, when we say attacks on history, that's LGBTQ plus history, that's Black history, it's Indigenous history, where people are trying to say, let's look forward instead of looking back.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's where we get in trouble, because if we forget how things came to be, we find ourselves making the same mistakes, and without getting into too much of a tirade, you're hearing the term fascism thrown around a lot nowadays. And people are like, that seems a little harsh. But if you look at the history of the rise of fascism, it's literally littered with things like book bans, anti-policies, policies that, restrict access to a particular level of education, restrict access to certain kinds of healthcare. And so, anyone who's a student of history starts to see a cyclical problem where you have a public that doesn't realize that what is happening in this moment looks very similar to what individuals experienced in the late 1920s, early 1930s, that allowed for the rise of some very problematic figures in history, the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Mussolinis of the world. And so, again, we cannot forget. We cannot afford to forget, because when you think about what the aftermath of the rise of fascism is, that's World War II.
Yeah.
That is worldwide depression. And what you don't want is to fall into the trap of being so enamored with these so-called charismatic figures that
the false prophets,
exactly, that are preaching hate at the expense of individuals or groups that you don't necessarily align yourself with, and you sit back and say, well, that's not me, so it's okay for them to say this about that group. It's a slippery slope that we've seen repeated throughout history. Of course, the early 20th century being probably the most recent example, but this has been a continuum of people kind of being lulled into a complacency because they don't want to pick up the book to learn. They don't want to go to lectures anymore. They don't want to look at documentaries anymore. They don't
Right.
want to, they don't want to actually learn facts anymore. And they start rejecting, truth and fact and science. And it allows for this kind of stuff to percolate. We don't want that.
For sure, for sure. So just a couple wrap-up questions. So first off, what are some resources that you can direct folks to if they want to educate themselves on the history of Juneteenth and also educate others, educate their family? Because again, we see with the book bans and all this foolishness going on in Florida and other states that folks may not necessarily get that education in the classroom, even though I will note some universities are public and private are doing different community events around Juneteenth. But, what are some resources we can direct folks to so that they can learn more and teach others about the history of Juneteenth?
Well, I know since we're both based in Florida, I want to start off first with some of the great resources that are available. And one Instagram page to follow is, of course, Emancipation Florida. And then their website is floridaemancipation.may20th.com. That folks can check out and learn a little bit more specifically about Florida's own emancipation. The works of the late Dr. John Hope Franklin, one of the most noted historians, in Black history, really starts to speak about Juneteenth in his series From Slavery to Freedom, especially some of the latter works that he's done. He, before he passed, he did, I think, 8 iterations of it. So once you start to get into 7 and 8, it really kind of highlights the Juneteenth celebration that's out there. You also have, again, good think pieces by folks like Ta-Nehisi Coates, Michael Eric Dyson, of course, Dr. Cornel West, that talk about the emancipation celebrations that have been ongoing for quite some time. And so definitely encourage folks to check out those writings. And that is, of course, not to shine a light on Nicole Hannah-Jones's 1619 Project. Again, that speaks to this notion of emancipation. But I also don't want us to get so caught up in the notion of the history of it to not really forget that we're still fighting to keep those things alive and well. And so what we don't want to find ourselves doing is backsliding into a space where we're having to fight again to be emancipated. And so I just want to remind folks that as part of the celebration of Juneteenth, there has to be kind of an undergirding of, the why, the what we're fighting for, the why we need to keep fighting, the why we need to vote, the why we need to continue to engage in politics, the why we need to make sure we know what's happening in our schools, because we don't want to find ourselves in a moment where schools are no longer teaching about these important subject matters. So, if you have a child in elementary school, middle school, high school, or in college, remind those teachers, remind those principals, remind those deans of students that Florida has a mandate. I repeat, the state of Florida has a 1994 mandate that requires the teaching of African-American history. So in spite of all that you're hearing about book bannings and classes being not being offered, you as a parent, you as a taxpayer have a right to make sure that Black history is showing up in the spaces where, your children, your nieces and nephews, your grandchildren, your friends' kids occupy. So fight for those things.
Absolutely. And on that note, I also want to highlight that Miami-Dade Public Schools did a call out for parents to help review some of the texts coming up for the upcoming school year. So I'm going to drop that information as a link in the comments. So if you have, I think the requirement is that you have a school-age child or you're a teacher. But basically, you have to have some real connection to the public school. So definitely encouraging folks to sign up. So it's not just extremists being able to, one parent having a poem banned from the schools. Like, let's have some folks with broader world views weighing in on some of these books to make sure that our kids are getting a robust education and not just one that's tunnel vision. So then final question for you, Dwight, how can folks reach you if they want to maybe do a day of service on Juneteenth or, or like, listen, I want to, dedicate some time to the struggle. How could they find you?
Well, this is going to be an annual celebration. And I want folks to think bold, think big about what that looks like for them, whether it be a small community celebration, whether it be a household celebration where you invite just a small cohort of families and friends, or whether it's more expansive, countywide, statewide, or national, that it can look a lot of different ways. But always remember that this is a celebration, again, of Black liberation, right? I'd be remiss if I didn't note the controversy in South Carolina, where you had a white couple being featured on some of the Juneteenth banners. And of course, you had mixed reviews on why people were upset. Should this not be allowed? I want to say again, Juneteenth is a celebration of Black liberation. So the notion of white, Asian, Hispanic folks celebrating Juneteenth, you're welcome to be a part of the celebration. But it is first and foremost a celebration of Black liberation. And so for that reason, we need allyship, right? And we need people to understand that this is a moment where they need to lift up, their Black friends and neighbors and not try to find themselves occupying a space that is not there. It's like me showing up during Hispanic Heritage Month, trying to impose my will in that space. That is a celebration of Hispanic heritage. It is an opportunity for us to enjoy the best parts of that, but it is not my role as an African American to dominate that space. And so I need people to kind of understand the significance of allyship and what that means. But to answer your question, you can always find me at dwight@floridarising.org. Happy to help people in their preparation for Juneteenth 2024 in the lead up to that, however they want to show up, because as we celebrate Juneteenth, this June 19th coming up, we want to make sure that folks are thinking about what that looks like for them in this month. And since I got a couple moments, one of the other beauties of June, and I want to ask this question to you, Melba, is June is also Black Music Month.
Yes.
And so please tell the folks, new, old, what you've been listening to that they need to be putting on their playlist.
So actually at FIU, I started, and this is something that started off as an offshoot of what we did when I was at the ACLU, which I created a course called Current Events Through the Lens of Music. And so the course actually starts next week. And the first song is Mississippi Goddamn by Nina Simone. Also included in that lineup are Changes by Tupac. And also Daddy's Lessons by Beyonce, talking about Second Amendment rights in the Black community and, her growing up as a Texan and sort of like, how that journey was for her. So those are the three that I'm listening to right now in the context of preparing for the class. Generally, I went down a Bill Withers rabbit hole not too long ago. And then I also will always go down a Prince rabbit hole. And yesterday was like all the LL classics. I don't know why. It just started off with like, "Who do you love?" And it just kind of went from there.
Oddly enough, it was, his birthday. So
wow.
That was it. Your time is perfect. You must have known.
I must have known because like my spirit was like, why don't you do this LL best of playlist? Sure, let's do it. And it was just like
I love it.
So what are you listening to?
Well, shout out to some new stuff. The Janelle Monáe Age of Pleasure should be on people's playlist. It's really just a celebration of self-love. And people can be okay with that. Check yourself. And today was a good day, to paraphrase Ice Cube, because Killer Mike just dropped a new single, Scientists and Engineers, that features none other than Andre 3000.
What?
After a 2-year hiatus, dropping a verse. And so, you don't know what you miss until it shows up on your doorstep. Right. And he is one of the GOAT MCs. So if you haven't heard that new track, treat yourself. He is just as brilliant as he has always been.
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna check this out as soon as we log off. That's gonna be the first song I'm gonna play because I need to hear what's happening here. I need to hear it.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, Dwight, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for, again, standing in the paint for us in Tallahassee and here at home. And so, of course, I'm always a big fan of giving people their flowers while they're here. So, sir, your flowers. We appreciate you. Thank you. And to everyone else, tune in. Thank you for tuning in, and tune in next week for another Mondays with Melba, where we're going to wrap up talking about Pride Month, as well as the ballot initiative to get abortion on the ballot in Florida. Take care, y'all. Bye.